You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me.
I first met Meers when I started my first job as an apprentice artist at Warsaw Lithographic Company back in 1966. He was effectively the assistant head of department at that time, though I seem to remember he was already doing a lot of the day-to-day running of the place even then, ahead of old George Jones's retirement. This cartoon I did of him in those early days shows how stressed and overworked he always seemed to be, and yet he always seemed to thrive on it all somehow. I was always a doodler, scribbling little coloured cartoons on my desktop, and now I'm very glad I did, because I kept them all down the years, and now I can look back on that early part of my working life and give you a little glimpse of what I saw of Moss's working life back then too. This was another one showing Moss under pressure. "Hello? Yes? 50,000 proofs cutting out by 4 o'clock. I can't promise." Notice the papers on the desk in front of him marked ASAP, urgent, very urgent, desperate. I see Moss was still sporting his spiky crew cut back then too. This next one is the first half of a two-parter. As the lad of the department, it was part of my job to be sent down the town to fetch things like sheets of letter-set dry transfer lettering, essential items in those times of hand-produced artwork. Of course the others used to get me to fetch other things for them while I was down there too. Now then, a pound of cheese and 2 apples for Keith, 4 ice lollies, a quarter of licorice and a choc ice for Harry, 6 cream cakes and 2 iced buns for Paul, an egg custard for Moss, 10 embassy for Ray and 10 senior service for George. Don't think I've forgotten anything. You Burke! You've remembered everything except the letter set you went down for to start with! Walsall Litho were famously printers of postage stamps for countries like Sierra Leone, Tonga and the Yemen, who dealt through an organisation called the Crown Agents. Their agent, who used to come and discuss what they required, was a stubby, brash, very loud American called Mr. Mechanic. They were very valuable customers, and this cartoon shows him at some sort of posh function organised by the Litho, with poor old Moss run ragged, waiting on him hand and foot, topping up his wine-glass. "That's enough, Maurice!" There were 7 of us in the art department when I first started there. This cartoon shows all 7 of us in a kind of group portrait or rogues gallery. I put in all the thought bubbles for everyone, except my own. That one was added by Harry Randall. He put me thinking, "I am twisted," although I can't imagine why. Old George Jones was the head of department, who seemed to have spent the last 5 years trying to keep Harry in check. "Now what's Harry banging at?" Ray Edge was the quiet one, little bit older than me. "I keep out of trouble at all times," was his motto. Next to him was Paul Wood. He loved stirring up trouble between others for his own amusement. I am an angel, but definitely not of peace. Harry Randall had been at the same school as Keith Dando next to him, and they never got on very well. I hate Keith, and Paul sometimes. Keith, on the other hand, was easily wound up all the time. I hate everybody, all the time. Then, at the end of the row, there was Moss. I'd often heard him say, "Ernie was right," in the early days, though I never understood what he meant by it. Ernie Hyde, apparently, had been a former colleague of his, and seemed to have expressed an opinion about something or someone before he'd left, causing Moss to say, "Ernie was right," every so often, to the general amusement of those older ones who'd remembered him and what it was all about. When Moss saw this cartoon showing him thinking, "Perhaps Ernie was right," he'd laughed like a drain. To this day I never got in on the joke. Harry Randall was a real character. He always swore by liquefruita cough medicine, which reeks of garlic, and he used to take great delight in breathing all over everybody when he'd just had a swig of it. I did this cartoon showing Harry blasting all of us with it, Ray and Keith at the front are gasping for breath. Behind them I'm reaching for a gas mask, and Moss is struggling with his asthma inhaler, while poor old George has been overcome by the toxic fumes and lies collapsed on the floor. I recall that Harry had recently bought a new pair of hush puppy shoes, and I drew him wearing them, sort of. This was a silly little one that I drew, inspired by Harry's habit of distorting Moss's name in all sorts of ways. He'd sometimes call him Moggy or Mog, or sometimes Mowgli. In this cartoon I've shown Moss in the guise of Inspector Maigret, where the TV programme's opening shots used to show the famous detective lighting his pipe by striking a match on a wall. For Maigret, read Mowgli. Another one that comes from Harry's variations on Moss's name. This was drawn in 1967, the year the Bonnie and Clyde film came out. I never met old Ernie Hyde, so I drew the monstrous Mr. Hyde from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde instead, standing beside Moss in drag as Bonnie, or Moggy, as in Moggy and Hyde. I think this one came about when Moss showed up for work one day in an exceptionally loud check jacket, causing an inevitable barrage of comments from Keith and Harry, especially Harry, comparing him to the more dubious variety of door-to-door brush salesman. I couldn't resist getting that mental image down on paper. This was a very quick, rough pencil sketch of Moss I never got round to tidying up in ink. I did hundreds of these little studies of different people at work back then. I've had to sift through all the boards I kept and copy every drawing I did that had Moss in it. He looks a bit over-severe in this one, I suppose, but you can tell who it is. You've heard the old joke, you don't have to be mad to work here, but it helps. Well, this was a kind of example of that notion. 4 of us done up in straitjackets, Keith Dando in a sort of giant baby grow, me dressed as the Kaiser, singing and whistling and driving everyone mad, Moss laughing hysterically under the strain of having finally become the boss, and little George Jones after he'd retired and didn't know what to do with himself. Here's that grouchy American stamps agent, Mr. Mechanic again, giving poor Moss a really hard time over some stamps that weren't ready when they were supposed to be. "I told you I wanted those stamps by last week, Maurice!" This one shows Moss in a merrier mood, though I can't for the life of me remember why I drew him running like this. I never finished this particular drawing, so I'll never know what it was supposed to represent. Ah, now, there's a story to this one. Walsall Litho ran a very strict regime, no smoking and only 1 cup of tea provided, in the mornings, brought round on a trolley. Of course we used to have an unofficial one in the afternoons, too, always brewed up by the lad, who used to be me. By 1970 we had a new apprentice, young Kevin Jones, who wasn't as keen on maintaining the tea-making tradition as I'd been. If he could get out of it, he would, often by making himself busy in the darkroom at just the time when he should have been putting the kettle on for everybody. Of course we couldn't just walk into the darkroom when the door was locked, and Kevin knew it, so he could spin it out for most of the afternoon until it was too late and too near home time to bother. This cartoon shows Ray Edge banging on the door, "Kevin, please make the tea!" while I'm panicking looking at my watch and Moss is gasping and dehydrating outside the darkroom door. I notice Moss is wearing his loud check jacket again in this one. April 1970, and Morris comes back to work after being away on holiday. "Hi fellas, have you enjoyed my holiday?" He makes a grand entrance, sporting yet another flashy new jacket, this one in brown corduroy with suede panels and pocket flaps. I'm not so sure about the buckskin-style trousers, though. I may have exaggerated those for the cartoon. I honestly can't remember now. I included the calendar, partly because April that year was quite a memorably big girl. Strange how I can remember that. This one again needs a bit of explanation. The company had employed a development engineer called Norman Millward, who spent a lot of time in our department doing his technical drawings. He was never one of us, though, and none of us liked him at all. He had a really annoying habit of constantly sniffing all the time. Then we heard that he was leaving, and young Kevin came up with the idea of seeing him off with a 21 sniff salute. Of course I had to illustrate that one, didn't I? I can easily recognise who's here. Left to right is me, Moss, Ray Edge and Kevin. We were down to 4 in the art department by that time. Here's another one on the same theme, Norman's departure. Due to his unpopularity, his teacup had accidentally got broken in the sink while being washed up on several occasions. We'd been jokingly discussing what we could present him with when he left, and Kevin came up with the brilliant notion of giving him all his pieces of smashed cups back. Of course we didn't really do that, but it made a funny cartoon to draw at the time. "All the best, Norman, and in token of our esteem, here's all your pieces of smashed cups back," Moss is saying, gleefully watched by Kevin, Ray and I. "1970 seems to have been quite an eventful year. Norman had gone and our art department had undergone a trendy new makeover. Gone were all our old company-built desks and the dividing screens that had separated them. The room was now all open plan, with modern stylish new desks for us to work at, and all the storage cupboards were now out of sight behind a huge new screen at the back of the room. The company had employed a design consultant who had been responsible for these changes, but then it was all about to change again. Moss came up from the office and broke the news to us. "Bad news, chaps. Now that the room's been converted to open plan, it's got to be divided up again." Before long a section was screened off from us and a new blue-eyed boy was installed in there. The new sub-company was called WL Design International, and it was a kind of elite, high-flying graphic design company that took all the nice designing jobs away from us, leaving us with the unglamorous humdrum stuff, and, of course, the job of making their unrealistic designs work with our finished artwork. I can't for the life of me remember the name of that pillock who came to invade our working environment, but he had a really high opinion of himself, and it was quite obvious that he regarded us as the lowest of the low. It became a real him and us situation. Of course young Kevin used to do things to annoy him whenever he could, and you could hear him tutting and slamming around in his little box, infuriated at Kevin's silly singing or playing around. Then he got his own secretary. Coming into what was previously an all-male environment, he felt he should warn Moss about Kevin's frequent swearing. "Could you tell your swinging ape-man, who I believe is away at college today, to mind his language when my new secretary starts?" I couldn't resist drawing a cartoon of that, with a little addition of Kevin's overhead revenge. Speaking of Kevin, I've previously shown how he could be a bit lazy when it came to his apprentice's tea-making duties. He had a real talent for art, but he could be a bit slapdash if he had to draw up something that he didn't find very interesting. I don't remember the details of this particular example, but I do remember Moss giving him a right dressing down over it. "What's this bloody daft flower pot supposed to be then, Kevin? It's downright ridiculous. Get and do the job properly." Moss did sometimes get his hair off with Kevin's lazy ways. The lad sometimes had to be prodded to get some of his jobs done, like filing away old artwork. On this particular occasion, however, Moss was a bit premature with his reprimand, as there was a pile of artwork with no names on the back, so they couldn't be straightforwardly filed. "Get that artwork filed, Jonesy! Ah! All this is stuff with no name." I was influenced at this time by the cartoons of the great H.M. Bateman. If someone was made to feel small, he used to draw them small, hence my little Moss walking away a little humbled at his having told Kevin off for nothing. That's the end of my cartoons of Moss at Walsall Litho. I left not long after this point, but I'm happy to say Moss and I did keep in touch down the years, albeit with some long gaps in between. He came to our wedding, and he was good enough to help us out with transport when our daughter Ingrid was christened in 1975. My brother Jeff filmed some of it on silent 8mm celluloid, so we're lucky enough to have these very short clips of Moss, looking very dapper as usual on that day. Here he is in his smart white jacket. That's me standing in the way of the camera. And there's a good shot of Moss holding little Ingrid in her christening dress. There he is trying to get her to look at the camera. but try as he might, he could not get her to raise a smile. This is how I'll always remember him, always well dressed, smiling, knowing what he was doing all the time, and always ready to help other people. A more consistent and true friend than Moss you could never wish to find. My life has certainly been all the richer for having known him.
A kind and steady heart is sure to see you through. A little courage goes a long, long way, gets you a little bit further down the road each day. And before you know it, you'll hear someone say, "That'll do, that'll do."